just to be clear, this workshop is called George Washington Carver and the Mycology of the Poor. And I'll kind of start with a little of my own background. Some of you, I think, may have read the website or biography, or maybe just wandered in. So my name is Zach, and I always lived kind of in this area. I actually lived on this farm for a couple years. And I'm now working outside of the Boston area, so I'm stationed out of there. I'm doing projects now with the National Botanical Gardens at a piece of property just south of here. Our goal is to make a database, and I'm taking pictures of all the in situ specimens of what actually occurs right in this area. We're finding species not known from this locale that are popping up that are only known from tropical China, for instance, the Radulomyces copelandii. For those who are intrigued, it seems like this topic of invasive fungi doesn't come up, but that's a really exciting one. It's also an inventory of plants. I'm doing another project with the National Park Service, and work as the liaison between Harvard and National Park Service now. Harvard does all the DNA barcoding and the stuff that I'm not all that interested in, but I really like field surveys, looking for rare, disappearing, and even just really common species that are missed. There we see a lot of Trichaptum biformes. Something I've wondered for a while is just, if it started disappearing, would we even notice? How would we notice? How would we recognize less of that? And we're seeing other log invaders come. So just some of what motivates me, some of my fascination with that topic of looking under a log and thinking, I know what I think this is, but trying to re-look again and rehash it. So that's a little of my background. I actually came across Carver originally from dumpster diving a library just south of here. They always throw out a lot of books, and if there's a book on Carver, there's a little reference on mycology, and that was the seed that started looking into it and finding out Carver has a lot more mycology about him than I thought. I'll talk more about him, but I'm talking a lot right now, so I just want to go around and folks can say their name, and just real quick, what brought you to the workshop today, George Washington Carver and the Mycology of the Poor. Feel free to skip too. Yeah, I'm really impressed with the turnout and really grateful everyone's here. I think it's amusing to see us all bunched in here, so I'm going to do my best to do this. Folks who are back here, if anybody wants to sit in here, it might be drier. You might prefer. Some folks didn't get a shower this morning. We can get more of one out there. I just want to make that opportunity available, and so everyone feels welcome and in a good spot. Likewise, any adjusting we need to do. So I don't have a lot of material to add here. As John mentioned, amusingly, I do come up on this Wikipedia site, which I learned only when I was giving a presentation on urban foraging, group asked me to, and I started looking up urban foraging, and like, okay, what research can I find out there? And it became very frustrating to suddenly see my picture and think, this is not helping. This is, So I kind of got in it was a tricky, I don't know how that presentation, I don't think was as good as it could have been. Fortunately, with Carver, I haven't come across anything from me, which makes it a lot easier. But I think whenever we study history itself is metaphor. And some of us were talking about studying history of kings and generals and who conquered who, and not really who doesn't exist anymore and whatnot. So trying to basically keep that in mind, that whenever we're telling stories, they are just stories, and they are just depictions, and every historian will tell things differently. I'm doing my best with not any credentials in history to cobble together a lot of information starting with a library book, and then that I dumpstered, and then going to the library and actually getting books that they didn't throw out through interlibrary loan systems, piecing together information to try to find out more about Carver. What I'm really ultimately trying to figure out through kind of my research, and it's a question I don't really plan to ever answer, so if you're looking for that, there may be somebody else will answer it for you, or maybe I'll try, but I'm really trying to understand the motivations of George Washington Carver to look for mushrooms. For those who don't know George Washington Carver, it's not known when he was born. The consensus is he was born pre-slavery. He was born as a slave and lived in pretty dire poverty up through his 30s. When I mentioned poverty and poor, I'm using his own definition. I'm not imposing this on him. He defined as that through a series of letters, which I've read the originals of. And throughout his career, he took on multiple interests. He got interested in chemology later in life. He was interested in small-scale sustainable farming really throughout his life. But something really early on that he was into are fungi. And those come up again and again throughout his life. And historians again and again have a lot of trouble finding that and recognizing it. And even looking at his notes aren't typed. They're, of course, like written in this kind of beautiful cursive script. And if you're reading a gymnosporangium, or about gymnosporangium, and you don't know what that is, you might think it's a plant. If you go to Wikipedia right now and look up Carver, it's going to say Carver is a botanist. And that's true, but technically, by his own definition, he was a botanist. And he was a botanist who studied the cryptogams. Gams, so I studied Latin for 4 years. I really like breaking down words. You may have heard of bigamy. Does anyone know what bigamy is? Anyone here? Two marriages, polygamy, multiple marriages. Gam is where that's coming from. Crypto is hidden. So if you're a cryptogam, you have a hidden marriage. You produce spores. Algae, mosses, fungi at one time were in the cryptogams. So all these hidden marriage plants at that time were in that group. And Carver studied those, specifically fungi, in school. When he went to, in the 1970s, science of mycology, or the kingdom of mycology started getting recognized in science. Whenever we're covering species and these species, genii, they all are social constructs, so we can try to better understand, make sense of things, divide them up, cut them in pieces, but that's ultimately what taxonomy is. So I know that's a lot of concepts and ideas dropping on folks right now. I hope everyone's kind of up to speed. If not, I'll keep doing my best to explain and concepts along the way. But yeah, there's some things there. So just to check in with folks, how's this presentation going so far?
Great.
It's going
Really good.
Exciting.
Okay. Great. So you can carry on with trucks. It's an important part of it. So, yeah, and I'm really glad that folks are here of all ages and interests. That's really important to me. So, and before I really launch into it more, I want to also emphasize something that's really important, just personally to me, like one of my motivations to study this topic, like first hearing about it and then hearing more, is mycology and really all of amateur naturalism, maybe all of amateur pursuits. They're really depicted by historians a lot of the time as an extension of privilege. That, oh, you have enough privilege, Victorian era, that's where James Audubon's killing birds and then drawing morbid pictures of birds. That's where a lot of us are going out and exploring and starting to understand the world. So what really appeals to me about Carver is it's one instance of somebody who, by his own definition, lived in poverty and was still studying mushrooms. So for me, that's really important because it gets to this idea that maybe, unlike a lot of historians depict it, I feel this, but here's an example of somebody who might be able to illuminate something about ourselves that might be less because of privilege. And maybe that's a part of it too. Maybe we all need some privilege to study these things. But yeah, just something I want to throw out there. On that topic, there certainly are a lot of other folks out there we could emphasize, like Stamets has identified as growing up poor. I think some of you may have heard of Stamets. There's Zaac Chaves, the composer. I don't know if everyone's aware of how big into fungi he was. Grew up in rural Appalachia, quite not a lot of money, but he says he originally, by the quick article I read, cursory research, like he got into it because of food. Like, of course, there's food out there. And there's all this cursory research we can do. Someone, and I guess this is a bit of a quiz. I like things a little interactive. So this is my first presentation piece. Pretend there's a projector here and that this is really fancy. So here's a picture of someone. Does anyone know who this person is? This is a very important person in mycology. I'm just going to bring it around slowly, see if... I think there's only one picture, so... It's, anyone have any guesses? Is it Linnaeus? Good guess.
I don't think that's the right
yeah.
era.
Yeah, not Linnaeus.
It's not Freeze.
Not Freeze. But you all are very close. Not Leeuwenhoek. So, has anyone heard of Persoon? So Persoon.
I've seen it after a lot of Latin names.
Yeah, you see. So L dot is Linnaeus. Persoon is another abbreviated name. He's seen the father of like systematic mycology. He's Christian Henrik Persoon. He's an immigrant from South Africa who nobody knows his motivation of mycology. He kind of just did all this amazing work, produced all these books, eventually had to donate all his collections in return for boarding. But yeah, throughout his life has been he wasn't doing very well in life.
Immigrant to where from South Africa?
His parents were Pomeranian and Dutch, and they moved to South Africa, and he went down to was raised there, moved up, was trained in Europe, but he kind of just somebody who's didn't do well. But I think this is really important because he's one of like the founding people in mycology, and I just want to bring him up because it's just an instance. This presentation is about him, but kind of just getting at some of my motivations. So hopefully some of you who aren't excited might be a little bit more excited. Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So I guess my presentation is going to be broken into a few parts, and it won't be too long. It's so I guess just as an agenda is I want to go on a quick overview of Carver's life, just major points in it. Folks who don't know about Carver will get a little bit more of an introduction about him. This will be a mycological perspective, and there's many far better books that can explain this, many far better documentaries that can fill in the blanks on the rest of his life, which I will be leaving out. I don't think I can really do it justice. And a lot of this research is coming from reading books, but then also being able to writing the authors of these books and saying, hey, I really liked your book, and I'm not an academic, and they're like, really? Like, what's wrong with you? Here's a bunch of information that's not available, and really helping me in a lot of ways, to the point where one actually gave me a recommendation to get down to Alabama to Tuskegee University and look through his personal notes. Some that weren't of access to historians, so I'll share some of these in my presentation with you. But so I guess a part will be just going through the chronology of his life. I afterwards want to emphasize some of the difficulties Carver had bringing mycology, keeping mycology prominent in black culture, so to speak. And I want to also emphasize, and I guess the third part would be emphasizing Carver's really sustainable agriculture, his really pioneering work in food justice far before the movement was is what it is now. Was putting a lot of work in things that are very relevant today. So hence might be coming up in a lot of history now. So so with that said, we can kind of start going into that riddle of why would this person be into fungi? Why would Carver be excited about, I don't know, I have these notes, I'm not even reading them, it's just for effect, I suppose. So why would, what is the emphasis? So just starting to go through his life, emphasizing his, Carver's childhood, the first instance I can find. And a part of what I'm doing is just looking recursively through some personal notes. I need to do a lot more looking at archives, but also just through looking at stories he told later on. But I think at some point in his life, I think it was, I don't remember who, he was asked to write a biography. I think it actually was his, he had a lot of people who helped him out along the way. He started he started born into slavery on a farm, and that farmer was a white farmer and was had the Carver, Moses Carver was kind of had a sustainable sort of farm. Carver, when he was born, was it sounds like there's a kind of romantic story about how he got and there's some questions about it, but he was basically captured by white vigilantes, came down, he was able to be brought back from this raid, but when he came back, he had pretty severe pneumonia that gave scars. It created scars in his throat, which he kept throughout his life. So he always characteristically had a very high voice. There's theories that he was castrated, but those have largely been dismissed. It seems whether or not that happened, pneumonia is really what caused that characteristically high voice. There are some recordings, which I encourage you to listen to, but we could have done that here, but I think it's a better use of your time to just run through some notes real quick. So early on, he wasn't really given a lot of labor, so to speak. He was kind of given a lot more domestic tasks, a lot more women's work, as it was known more at that time. He was taught to sew early on, taught to knit, and cooking was a big thing, and he was kind of learning a lot of things, particularly art. One of the first, so when he was asked to eventually in college write a quick biography of his life, because he was getting rewarded and no one knew anything about him, at that point he was known as George Carver. He was named for the farmer of the place he lived at. He gave a quick description. So just to give you a background, this is the first collection I can hear from Carver, in Carver's words of what it is. So I don't like to read things, but I'll read this just so you can hear a bit of that. I think it will be helpful. So, day after day I spent in the woods alone in order to collect my floral beauties and put them in my little garden I had hidden in the brush not far from the house, as it was considered foolishness in that neighborhood to waste time. And many are the tears I have shed because I would break the roots or flower off some of my pets while removing them from the ground. And strange to say, all sorts of vegetation succeeded to thrive under my touch, until I was styled a plant doctor, and plants for all over the country would be brought to me for treatment. At this time I had never heard of botany and could scarcely read. So just an early recollection from Carver. It's like people had gardens and whatnot, and their flowers would be dying, and he'd take them. And this is rural Missouri. There's a lot of cotton being grown, a lot of fertilizer science is just coming out and not really being deployed, so land is being depleted. So he's bringing these flowers to rich areas of the forest, getting them depicted, but he's also hiding because it's considered foolishness. So just kind of an interesting glimpse on Carver standing apart from social norms of that time, social constructs. So that's the earliest collection, and from there he's from Missouri. He starts traveling around, figuring out where to go, what to do, and decides at some point he wants to be a painter. And he actually was and I have a picture of one of his paintings that I'll pass around. And this is and he basically he got really into painting. He had a good mentor who was teaching him painting, botanical painting. And I'll just pass this around of one of the pictures that he exhibited. I'll just show it real quick. No one can really see it. It's black and white, but I'll pass it around so people can see more. This is the yucca and cactus picture. And just so and Carver is very descript at his drawings. And through making very detailed drawings, paintings, he actually exhibits this picture, I believe, at the Columbia World's Fair in 1893. So just so people can see kind of his work, and when he's drawing these pictures, his talent gets recognized, that he's not just a painter, he's really picking up on important details of plants, which is even artists now. There's a lot of places now and that botanically do, it's pretty horrible, they botanically do stuff inaccurately. I was at this store that has a lot of garbage that starts with the name Trader. I'll say no more on that. But they actually depict their brand of canola oil. The rapeseed plant has 5 stamens on one of the flowers. I think they're stamens, it's not too clear. But can you believe this? So this is a time when it is emphasized. You know, that's happening, but when people get it right, it's really recognized. And it was in this case. And when it was recognized, he was actually taken on and given a scholarship to go to University of Iowa, which at the time was one of the first land-grant universities. So it's a really big deal to go there. He got there through his art, but it was through really this look and appreciation of plants. When he went to college, he studied botany, and one of the, let's see. Boy.
Are there any books or records of this?
I think there's, I don't know books, there might be though. His painting career is not really known super well, but it does just appear in his biographies. The Yucca and Cacti is, I think, his better known picture. But throughout his journals, he writes pictures. So if you ever get to see his journals or know a historian who highlights his journals, Google Scholar I like a lot. Sometimes that has a lot of good information. I think a lot of them may not be up there. There's also good stuff at Tuskegee's website. They have digitized a lot of their archives. There's a lot that aren't digitized. Something really important about Carver's grad school, or going to school as well, is he studied under Pommel. Louis Pommel, does anyone know Louis Pommel? I'm talking a lot, so I'd like to give people the opportunity to talk. I always have things to... So Louis Pommel, as I understand, he's big into plants, big into fungi, but he's also one of the he really pioneers the science of invasive biology. Particularly, and I think it's really interesting, his writings and just the words he uses, because he talks about these, the railroads are being developed, and at this time, this is the late 1880s, early 1890s, and he's doing botany along the railroads, and he's talking about how there's these colonizer plants that are coming along the railroad. And I find that really interesting. I first read some mushroom cultivation books. It's kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that word. It has like a little implication, but that was the original definition of invasive by Pommel. So this is who Carver's studying under. Pommel's also known for really studying ecosystems as opposed to single plants. So he started studying those. Clemens did a lot of that as well. So he's working really with one of these top scientists. Let's see. Just a moment. Yeah, so, and just to emphasize his career, and this is why I want to go to Iowa and study their archives too. I don't have a lot of information there, but when Carver was there, the two things that I know he studied, two thesis topics, were one is Pommel was talking about the effectiveness of a fungicide called Bordeaux mixture. You may have heard of it. Carver was early on looking at that and trying to challenge some of the effective findings of it. Carver was not really emphasized. He would use chemicals, but he really liked to investigate and be pretty thorough. So that was one of his things, criticizing his professor's work on Bordeaux mixture. The other one was trying to take a list of fungi found in Ames, Iowa, primarily parasitic fungi that occurred. The fungi that I know that Carver was mostly interested in, I happen to have some of these here, but they're the pyrenomycetes. If you see any wood and it looks black and it's not burned, a lot of times there's a pyrenomycete on it. We're talking diatribe, Diatribella, Utapella, Rosalinias, but mostly diatribe. So great, this one went around.
Are those in the Xylariales?
Xylariales, yes.
Yeah.
He was big into Xylariales. So keep in mind, the world expert to Xylariales, he wrote, Carver was writing through him throughout this person's life. Is that Elias? Ellis? Yeah, Ellis. He wrote the North American Pyrenomycetes. And if you look online, you can get it for free because it's in the public domain. It came out in 1874. So it's a really good reference still today. There are some new ones coming out, but he was one of the good ones. So I'll just pass around a few Xylariaceae. I have some black stuff on wood here. Something else I'll point out, if those of you have, go to your fanny packs and grab your potassium hydroxide.
How you going to say hand lens? We could send my hand lens around with that. It makes it way better.
So what's neat with KOH, if you put a little on, actually, I don't know if this will show up.
pass that around with it. You have to get
yeah.
super close. Like, I can see my fingernail right now. Really close.
Yeah, hold it like a monocle.
Yeah, and hold it up so you're not shading it with your head
Towards the light.
towards the light.
Yeah.
So closer, like really close.
So the things, so the things to note when you're looking at pyrannomycetes is look for papillate tips. They're little nipple-like projections on it, and pyrannomycetes are basically stroma, or like an armored material. And in there are these little delicate holes, and each one of those holes, which are the papillate tips you're seeing, they're just little chambers full of asci, and each of the asci has ascospores. So they're very exciting for
So
me.
is chaga?
Chaga is not a mushroom. Chaga, it can mushroom, but it's rare, very rare to see. I know if you're buying chaga fungi. You aren't buying the mushroom. When it mushrooms, it's a racupinate polypore. We have a really great racupinate polypore we're trying to identify. That one is not chaga. That one's a fused reflex. I think whereas chaga, it's just racupinate. But Sam Ristich, one of Gary Lunkoff's contemporaries, who is big into entomology, big into mycology as well, he would call it the holy grail of all mushrooms, to actually see the mushroom. There's a lot of people just...
Really close. Like, the mushroom and the lens need to be like less than a centimeter away from each other, and the lens should be pretty much right up to your eye.
So I mentioned earlier that... Oh, and actually I have another painting by Carver, so I'll just pass this around. Let's see what the pictures actually have. So from Carver's college career, folks want to come under, there's also space in the feel free. So from Carver's college career, I also want to bring up that he went, and how are we doing on time? I think we have, we're 11:08.
Oh boy, so yeah, like 20 minutes.
Okay, so we'll try to wrap this up in 20 minutes to make it happen.
Yeah.
But so from Ames, Iowa, he had a lot of achievements with drawing and doing work. He got a scholarship to study more, take on a PhD at Ames, and this is the top school. At the same time, Booker T. Washington, some of you may know of him, he's the president of Tuskegee University, which was founded as a university to help a post-slavery black population become self-sufficient in many ways. Farming was a part of that, but it was a big school, and Booker T. Washington had reached out to Carver to hearing of his talents, wanting him to teach agriculture there, take over the agriculture school. That's kind of where Booker T. Washington comes, and Carver is very divided on it, and eventually comes to the school for a reduced salary than he would get at Iowa, under the agreement that one of Carver's letters is kind of like, I accept, but it's as long as I have a place to study and keep my mycological specimens safe, this is going to work well for me. So you're starting to see some of like maybe tensions coming up, priorities, but also what's really important, like what helps, money isn't everything in life, maybe like happiness, enjoyment, and really fulfillment, and being able to do the hard work people are doing every day comes from more than just a salary. So Carver mentions that there. He ends up he goes to Tuskegee. There's a lot that goes on there. He does classes. In his classes, I actually got reference to his personal notes. I presented these notes on 2 occasions before at conferences. And being that I don't have a presentation here, I'll just pass along the first pages of Carver's notebook, which were basically, like I took pictures of them there at the Tuskegee Archives with a very generous staff, and I think it's really interesting, the first pages of his notebooks. I'll just pass a couple or one of these this way. We have one of these in this back row over here. And these are the first pages of his personal notebooks. He has basically 5 or 6 notebooks, and they all have things he's drawing. And what's neat about these is they're all pictures of fungi, like up-close fungi things. And unfortunately, they aren't in color, but he actually painted them. So they had like blues and whites, which were a kind of neat thing in that time period, late 1890s. So where he's coming from. Early on, and this is starting to look at some of me kind of rushing and going through, but looking at Carver's motivations, he definitely at times mentioned edibility was one of them. He says eating wild mushrooms and plants helped him get through college. And he produced bulletins. So he produced bulletins to folks just talking about wild plants. It was really important to him, particularly when at Tuskegee, and having a wider audience to get information out. One of his methods of this was creating these little bulletins. We might call them zines now, but they were just little booklets on edible wild plants, very simple topics often. One was called How to Grow a Tomato. One of the most famous, I think, was 104 uses of the peanut. And the peanut he's emphasizing, the peanut industry has really emphasized it in their historical depictions. He really was emphasizing legumes, the peanut being one of them. And he was emphasizing legumes. Some of you may know why legumes would be emphasized in a highly nitrogen-depleted, cotton-intensive soil. Anyone want to tell us?
They fix nitrogen in the soil.
Okay. Yeah, we fix nitrogen in the soil. So specifically, and I'll bring this up at the Mycology conference, there's little nodules, the little bacteria inside are creating nitrogen, so it's a great way to lessen your need for fertilization.
Are the little books like that he made, are those available like on internet or in like archives or anything?
Tuskegee University has digitized all the booklets and put them online.
Cool.
So you can actually look at all these booklets, and you can print them out. You can have them at zine fairs or whatever, because they're in that format, and they're kind of neat. And I actually, one of the reasons I like passing things out is I brought one of them with me. And this is a little premature, but it's one of them that I think is really strange, because while he was giving this out, the other method, so I guess I'll pass this one out. So so one of his things was edibility, but he also, keep in mind, as he's, the time period, late 1800s is, and early 1900s, this one I'm going to pass out is the early 1900s as a hint, is a few decades earlier, there was, a few centuries earlier, there's a population boom in Europe with a lot of food coming in. One of the theories on that boom is because of a few species of fungi on food, there's ergot on wheat, fusarium on corn, Phytophthora infestans on potato. There's a European potato famine, there's also an Irish potato famine, but one of the theories was that when they had all these new foods come in, they suddenly weren't as reliant on wheat. And wheat, there's a lot of really bad diseases with them, not just celiacs, but whenever wheat's grown, they grow it for high gluten. The stuff that has there's certain molds that will cause like your brain to just turn to like a Swiss cheese-like substance similar to Creutzfeldt-Jacobs. They test it for that, and it all has that. It just, if it has too much, they give it to like horses or dogs or cats. If it has, like right on the line, the FDA will say, well, this should, or is it the FDA? Yeah, I think the FDA says, well, we recommend this don't go to the human population, but we aren't going to enforce that. So, in Europe, there wasn't an FDA. There was a lot of diseases coming about. Salem, Massachusetts, the Salem witch trials may have been caused by ergot, is one of the theories. I won't go too much into that here. So this is one of my hypotheses. Like, food is one of them he mentions, but there's also importance here. And this brings us to the zine or the bulletin that I'll bring up. And I'll just pass this around. This is to go around slow, and I'll just go through it really quickly with you all, since it might go around slowly. This so I mentioned how to grow a tomato, 104 uses of peanuts, some edible wild plants of this county.
It's a potato.
Yes.
That's a sorry.
So this one is called it's the Tuskegee University of Industrial Institute of Tuskegee, Alabama, and this title is Some Cercospori of Macon County, Alabama, and immediately very practical topic for farmers, particularly if you keep this background in mind. I think this was more aware for people as the science was coming out or people were developing. And what I find really interesting about this is he has a little introduction and little credits, and then he goes through a recursive list of a number of Cercospori. And like I said, I think this will go around slowly, so I just want to go through what I find to be some important points. First, I just want to read the first section of this. And he's trying to make a case on why this is important, and that title may not grip people. But so he says, the wide distribution and economic importance of the Cercospori in this county has prompted the writing of this paper. What a gripping intro, huh? This list by no means presents all species of this county, as no special effort has been made to collect Cercospori only. The collections were passing to and from other duties. So mentioning just some common fungi he finds, and then after writing about that, he mentions Ellis and Everhart. And you'll see with the species here, some of them grow on economic leaves, other ones don't. And after mentioning the economic importance, he then says, many species are included here that have but little or no economic value, but since they may become, in the process of plant evolution, more or less beneficial or destructive diseases, it is important to know them all. So, there's some important stuff for our health, but just learn all Cercospori. A real sort of field mycology there. So you'll see some he kind of mentions, and a lot of it's Latin, so you'll see C. calicola, which does injury to the stems and leaf of the common asparagus. But a lot of these plants just don't have any economic value that's known. But he kind of says, well, it might at some point, so that's important. So just so folks can have a look at that. And to me, when I pass this around, and this is just my own interpretation, I think there might be more to it than that. He might find, like, Carver throughout his life is emphasizing sustainable agriculture, the importance of connecting from the land, really growing wealthy from the land, as he puts it in some ways, not through getting money, but through having enough to feed yourselves. And he writes very vividly and directly about that topic. But just by knowing and being fulfilled, as Carver was, by just knowing all the inhabitants around oneself, really connects one to place. A really important thing to know about this time period, too, is there was certainly a lot of vigilante and non-vigilante violence going on against many poor populations, particularly black populations, and with that violence, people were leaving. Another thing that was happening, which isn't emphasized as much, but is also had a big draw and a lot of importance, is a lot of mechanical devices. Early industrialization were coming out. Machines that would pick cotton. And suddenly the value of one's labor in the South, from skills they knew and were good at, were becoming devalued substantially. So whereas someone may have been able to make a lot of money with one method by picking cotton, suddenly their work was being swept out from under them. At the same time, there was a draw, being that cities in the North, industrial cities like Chicago, were starting to boom, like Detroit, and large cities were needing a lot of labor. So there was, both the push from vigilante clan violence, from a devaluement of work, and also a draw from these high-valued jobs in the North. And this is right when Booker T. Washington's University came out, right when Carver was working here. So when reading his work, keep in mind there's this idea that, and Carver mentions this, that he doesn't really judge people who move up there. He's working with a lot of people in the North, a lot of people who are working in cities, trying to get them connect with nature. But there's something about Carver repeatedly throughout his work that he finds it very important to maintain that place-based connection. Very ahead of his time, especially at the time when you had John Muir going to the Yosemite, Roosevelt, national parks are getting created. Here's Carver going to the depleted, denuded abandoned valleys of Alabama in this case, and emphasizing there is a real value here, and this is where like wealth is coming from. And I had quotes on this, and I bring this up throughout work, but I don't know.
Is that
if
where
I really...
Tuskegee was? Was it Alabama?
Yeah,
Or-
Macon County, Alabama, Tuskegee, Alabama. So it's right around there. We're at about 11:20 right now, so let me skip through some stuff and see what is vital. Again, I appreciate everyone's patience, and I want to have time for some quick Q&A towards the end. Some other pictures. Is there anything vital? Yeah, he had some interesting affiliations. I have a picture of Carver and Ford. Henry Ford was a big fan of Carver's here. So just a very hard figure to research because he's kind of, everyone has their own history that they're telling about this person. It's a pommel. Yeah, none of these are essential. I also was going to do a part of this presentation where it's going to talk about the largest populated, for those who live in this area, the largest population of blacks in Westchester prior to the Civil War. And Westchester's a county just north of here, north of New York. Westchester was an anti-Lincoln county in the north. It stood apart. It still is politically kind of different from everywhere else around it. So they were anti-Lincoln at that time, and there was a black community, or a very prominent black community there, that was quite hardscrabble. Quakers in the 1830s encouraged people to give up slaves. Where do they go? Let's donate land. And it became the most densely populated black population right near White Plains, New York. So if anyone's interested in that, interested in local history, I really recommend checking it out. It's now a park, and it was only recently discovered that, oh, that's strange. What are these stones that are lined up? Oh, these are graves. And the local AME Zion Church was like, wait a minute, like this is this is important. We kind of want some say over what is happening with this land as opposed to park. So
What is that park called?
that's Silver Lake Park yeah, it's right near White Plains, New York. So that's, yeah, you can find the graves there. You can find old buildings. I actually have but it's one of these buildings, and part of my research has been trying to see some connection with letters written back and forth. But because no one lives there currently, I feel like letters exist. Carver was writing to people in Mount Vernon, New York, over in the Bronx and whatnot. Here's one of the places. If you drive by, there's a big danger, keep out sign on an old black church in that area. So this is just south of here. There's like lots of history that's not really depicted, and it was hidden until people found these gravestones and started caring about them. Yeah. So this is right from the road. That's called Bootonville Road. And Bootonville is known as a haunted road. People go on Halloween. But yeah, if you go during the day, you can see stuff a lot better. So yeah, that's another story. There's a lot of folklore in New England in general. And yeah, and actually I found the map. Here's the old map of that area. So if anybody who wants to explore it, here's where a census map, where the census went and tried to catalog the houses. This is St. Mary's Lake, which has been renamed Silver Lake. And I've superimposed this on maps and tried to explore and find sites. Yeah, so it's just a really interesting thing. I think there was someone from the area here that was interested, but if someone wants to take a look at just the maps and the names, censuses have their mistakes, but that was just some stuff. And I guess as I close up this presentation, part of it went really fast. Really important points to keep in mind. Carver was certainly a prophet of sustainable agriculture, sustainable agriculture that didn't cost money, coming from Iowa State where they're producing fertilizers. He was always encouraging farmers to go to the swamp, get muck, put it in your fields. What can you do for free? And that's a common thing you'll see on his bulletins. Look them up. Write to these authors because they don't get a lot of messages from folks like us, and when they do, I think sometimes they might try to make stuff a little more accessible to us. It also encourages them a lot because they feel like their work is important and they do a lot more, I think, that way. But as I've seen, they're really good people in general, the ones I've worked with, which seems to be all of them so far. And yeah, and I know we've covered a lot here, and I guess I could go over some other stuff, but you've really done me a huge, you've really given me a lot of privilege to have so many people, so many time to just talk in front of you and talk for so long. I'm really grateful for all that. So if we want to open this up first for if there's any like really direct responses, like, oh, you said this and I just want to correct that, or something that offended me, like let it be known here and whatnot, and we can like figure that out. And then I think in 4 minutes we'll try to head over to Willoughby's talk or whatnot. Does that sound good to everyone? Does that sound like a good way to kind of do this? Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you knew of any connections or communications relationship between Carver and Charles McIlvaine, who is, as far as I understand, geographically and temporally in a similar range as a mycologist, but he was white, and I believe he was fighting in the military for the Confederates. And I'm just curious about that historical relationship.
So Carver has been honored by, like he didn't just work with black farmers, and he didn't just work with poor farmers. He really worked with everybody.
Cool.
He would call people out when they were just very obnoxious and supremacist. My answer is I don't know.
Okay.
He was just very, but there's boxes and boxes of letters that haven't been digitized at Iowa, at Tuskegee, likely at some other institutions, and unfortunately, like a lot of historians have gone through and do tremendous work figuring out things about him. Most of the moneyed work has been churches who want to emphasize this person was a scientist and really liked God, and we want to bring that out there. There's also been a lot from the peanut industry. We'll give a grant to somebody to say, this guy was a scientist and he did all this stuff with peanuts. And there's a lot of bad science, like he didn't come up with peanut butter. That's what I learned in school. Turned out it's not true. So there's, that's strange. Why would our teachers tell us something that's not true?
I know.
Wait, didn't peanut butter come out like in Mali and Senegal like hundreds of years ago, probably?
Yeah. So, but there are historians who will say Carver invented it, or at least.
Yeah, I was definitely taught that.
So it's why it's important for, I know I'm giving you a kind of a whole like just cloud of information, and I apologize for as daunting as that can be, but definitely you have my email, or I can give folks my email address. I don't think it's posted anywhere if you need it.
Obviously Google works, and you mentioned Google Scholar, but for general research of any type, do you have any go-to websites or?
I really like libraries a lot. I'm somebody who likes books, and I like taking notes of books. I have some folks have seen them, just a little box full of index cards. I try to put each book on one index card. By the time I wrote it, I don't need the index card. So I just have this neat little thing going 10, 15 years back of every book I've read. So it helps me reference something, and I forget things after 6 months. So it helps me compile things. I like books because they're all in one place, and you can kind of research the author's background and get some idea. I don't like Google much for these topics because there's so much mythology, especially if you look up mushrooms online, very quickly you start finding out about space aliens and connections with some greater powers and such, and it's very easy to spiral to a place that isn't what I was looking for. Any research, it starts best, I think, with a good hypothesis. Here, kind of just trying to really wonder. It's very open, so it maybe means I'll never publish, but it's good because I'm not in school, so I don't have to get a thing. Trying to understand, what were the motivations? Was it food? He certainly said that. Was it these plant diseases that weren't really known? Was it also sustainable agriculture and getting it out there? There's likely more hypotheses I may come with or develop, but those are some of the things that I don't think I can ever answer no to and ever answer yes, but just trying to compile the research over time and work trips. So yeah, but Google Scholar I like a lot, because Google Scholar, at least there's some peer reviewing there, and particularly I remember wanting to look up a site of a well that had closed that caused a lot of leukemia, and I couldn't find it, but Google Scholar showed me a map of exactly where it was, so then I could hunt out in the woods and find that well. Which is, I don't know, kind of a somber thing to find.
What are Cercosporae?
Good question. So Cercosporae are leaf spot fungi.
Okay.
If you
Is that
pick up,
still a classification, or is that was like archaic? It's archaic now.
so whenever a genus is named, there's a great site, Index Fungorum, and if you look up a species of fungi, it will give you the list of everybody who's named it every time. When we name a fungi, it always ends with like a letter, like Pursoon or Freeze or someone else, and basically it's the person who named it.
Yeah.
So it's whenever you read a fungi name, it's Amanita muscaria, as named by Linnaeus.
Yeah.
But there's another
Yeah, that's
mycologist
by no
who may have called something else Amanita muscaria.
Yeah.
So, and you get a lot of that. So, you know, the names are super important. If you have the name included, you never get it wrong. And it's okay to use the old names because, what was it? Calvatia gigantea, about 20 years ago was renamed, it was so big they called it Langermania gigantea. They changed it, and that was the latest science, and people would step up and like puff out their chest and say, that's a Langermania, how could you not know this? And 10 years later, they changed it back to Calvatia. So you kind of want to wait for stability to happen. It's helpful to know the names, but if you know the person who named it, that's enough.
You're still connected to that organism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as he said, the names are all social constructions. The mushroom is what the mushroom is.
Yeah.
We call
Great
it what
point.
we call it.
Yeah.
So with that, I don't want to take up too much time because we're going off to Willoughby's talk. If anyone has anything...
Or other talks. There's other things happening also.
It's all
Right.
about you, man.
Can you repeat, you said index, what was it called?
indexfungorum.com.
Thank you.
And that's where if you look up, I remember an herbalist looking for Coriolus versicolor, not knowing that the book this herbalist was using was now, like, now it's Trametes. But if you look there, you'll just see the whole list of 25 names by different people and what the current accepted name is.
Okay.
So, yeah. But with that, I'll turn it over to Willoughby. Any other questions, feel free to bring them to me. Thank you kindly, or turn it over to the rest of the conference as well. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful.
Thank you.